G'day and welcome to another segment of the Build Me a Brewery podcast. My name is Chris Hayton. So far we've sat down with successful brewery owners. We've talked about some possible financing and capital raising options, small business and accounting considerations when structuring and setting up the business. And just last week we talked about the brewery licensing and government compliance aspect, which I hope was helpful for people to get a clear idea on the confusing world of dealing with local council and getting approval by all levels of government to produce and sell beer legally. We now move into brewery consulting and quality management. I thought about having the equipment sourcing segment before this topic. However, there were some great topics that we discussed throughout this segment on brewery model concepts and great advice on what to consider prior to sourcing and purchasing your equipment. So I thought best to chuck this segment out first. Now, this is a massive four-part segment that features some big and well-known names within the brewing industry in Australia who share a wealth of knowledge for aspiring brewery owners to consider when planning their brewery build. The episodes include Neal Cameron from Brewtique, Steve Hendo from Rockstar Brewer and the man behind the famous Brewcult brand, Dan McCulloch and Richard Chamberlain from Lollamond Brewing, and an interesting chat with PK Agrawal from the Fifth Ingredient, who talks to us about their brewery management software Beer 30. Our first episode of the segment, I sit down with Neal Cameron from Brewtique. Now, Neal's name has come up multiple times on this podcast so far, so it was great to finally line up a time to meet with him, seeing how busy he is in the brewing industry. Neal, he's been working and consulting within the craft beer industry for over 15 years now, having started out in the wine industry and then moving on to helping with the setup of the Australian Brewery, who we talked to in our earlier Meet The Brewer series. He then took a step back from that to co-write the first formal educational course at TAFE New South Wales related to microbrewing. Currently, he works for Brewtique, which is a brewery consulting company which installs breweries all over Australia. So as you can see, this is why I really wanted to sit down with Neal. Not many people in the industry have this many stories and experiences to share as he does when it comes to opening a brewery. He's lived through 20 plus brewery builds in his long career, all neatly explained in a 60-minute interview. So without further delay, I hope you enjoy part 1 of 4 of the segment with my sit down with Neal Cameron. Welcome, Neal.
Welcome, thank you.
Now, I've been pretty excited to actually sit down with you finally. Your name has come up probably on nearly every single episode. You do get around the industry.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I think we were just talking, I've been in the industry for 15 years and during that 15 years, the genesis from, what was a few breweries to now hundreds has been extraordinary. So, and having brought a lot of skills from outside the industry and then coming into it later in life, it's just been an absolute blast. The opportunities that have been there have been extraordinary. And I've tried to grab as many of them as I possibly can. Yeah,
and so started out in the industry back in as early as 2005 before, this big boom in craft beer.
No, exactly. In 2005, I was working in the wine industry at the time, which I don't tend to admit too often. And I was doing some education courses, being a bit of a habitual beer wanker. I was writing for magazines, and I was doing an adult education beer appreciation course. And through that, I got to know De Bortley Wines, and they were wanting to start a craft brewery. So they were one of the early guys. And because I'd already done my postgrad in brewing at Ballarat University at the time, I was kind of well placed to do it. So they took someone who'd never brewed before in his life, never home brewed, but I had done a lot of stuff on beer and I did know about beer, and I went straight from being a operations manager to running a brewery. So it was a hell of a leap. Yeah. And I actually got the gig because I was campaigning to save Coopers against the Lion Nathan buyout that was in 2005.
Oh, right, yeah.
And something went quite badly wrong. Too long a story for here, but I basically got fired from McGuigan Simeon for supporting Coopers because it put in jeopardy a large wine deal that Brian McGuigan was doing. So I got fired on the Sunday, and then Darren de Bortley rang me on the Monday and said, seeing as you haven't got a job, would you like to come and start a brewery for us? So there was something really poetic about that. For sure. Yeah,
it's the timing was impeccable, and it sounds like it was sort of almost destiny. So
maybe that's it.
And we were talking offline before we kicked off the podcast, but maybe worth our listeners. You actually have never homebrewed in your entire life.
Never.
No.
Never.
Wow.
Well, I always felt that I've always had quite good jobs, so I was always able to afford good beer. And I travelled around the world quite a lot with previous jobs, so I got to try it. And I just I never really had the time nor the inclination to do it myself, and I left it to the experts at the time.
Yeah, wow. Okay. So, as I've mentioned to all the listeners, and I've given them a bit of an introduction about yourself and the topic of interest for today's episode, I was really keen to sit down with you and pick your brain about, I guess, all the steps and challenges and mistakes made by aspiring brewery owners. And I think existing breweries will also take a lot out of this as well, because there's probably a lot of existing breweries that probably aren't doing the right things currently, or could improve things. So I think they would benefit from it as well. But tell us a bit about you. You currently got a brewery consulting service called Brewtique.
Yep.
And you offer brewery consultant services. So do you want to give us a bit of a rundown of what services you do offer?
Yeah, for sure. And the most of what we do is basically install breweries. So that is the bread and butter. And we've done about 20 in the past 3 years. So business is good. I think we've got 6 or 7 in production. So both myself and Gavin, who's our MD, we both are brewery owners. So we have our own brewery. Gavin has Seventh Day, and I have Harvest Brewing, which we're just setting up in Bury at the moment. And also, having been through a lot of these brewery startups, we've seen it. We know the DA process. We know what's involved. We know how much weight your floor needs to take. We know the gas pressures that you need. All these little questions that people like yourself who want to start breweries do. But so that sort of cradle to grave approach of helping people like yourself or your listeners, from that, I want to start a brewery, how do we do that? And we've done it so many times now, from very small to very large, that we know everything really involved, although surprises still arise. But also a lot of what we do, particularly nowadays, you simply cannot start a brewery and make crap beer and get away with it. When I started off 2005, you could get away with some shockers because the customer base was not that knowledgeable. So, aspiring home cooks will go and start restaurants and make crap food, and they'll go out of business very quickly. The same is now true of breweries. If you don't make good beer, you're going to go out of business very, very quick. And one of the main problems we have is people just don't know. People don't know what's a good beer and a bad beer. They can't identify the faults. They don't know how to correct them. So a lot of what I do nowadays for startup breweries, but also for existing breweries, we've worked with the likes of Dainton, Source, good, capable breweries who just want to take the next level. So we can help people make good beer, basic, but also having built breweries from nothing up to very large breweries, we also know the steps that you need to take, with your marketing, with your product development, with your quality management, with your, things like HACCP, quality management systems, everything from the small brewer and how to carbonate your beer all the way through to how do you put in HACCP and how do you get organic certification, all that kind of stuff, because we've done it before.
Yeah, excellent. And if you wouldn't mind giving listeners, and we've touched on it in other episodes, but with all the different brewery model concepts, because just so the listeners know, I actually reached out to you, when was it, maybe a couple of months back, and I had it all wrong. I think I went, okay, how much is the equipment going to cost me? And, came across your website, you gave me a call and basically set me straight and basically said,
you don't do it.
Well, that's it. But, find a premises first. So, we hadn't even considered that first. And, I was so focused on what sort of system I wanted. And you also gave me a big reality check about the costs involved as well. But talk to us a bit about what the different types of brewery model concepts you come across or you would recommend, and maybe if you're able to, pros and cons of each.
Absolutely. I guess what we'll start is with what is the sweet spot at the moment. And most of the projects that we're doing at the moment are that kind of 10 hec system, able to produce 40, 60 kegs a week kind of thing, obviously split between kegs and pack. And almost all of them have a retail outlet, so it is a brew pub. And that cash over the bar, those 60, 70% margins that you make on the retail side of your business allows you a huge amount of leeway to build your business a little bit more gradually, and you just get cash through the door. Because by the time you've gone through that kind of project, and the average cost of setting up that kind of brew pub would be at least $500,000. with infrastructure costs, with DA costs, cool rooms, kegs, floors, drains, gas, whatever, all those contracts, all that bullshit reports you have to do for DAs, it all adds up. So the cheapest I've ever seen that being done for was Eden Brewery in Mittagong, and Deb and Jacob, basically lived in the unit for a year, getting bitten by mosquitoes and cold. This is in Southern Islands over winter. Yeah. And that, I think they did it for 200,000, but they bought a super cheap brewery. All their friends helped them out, and that was really bare bones stuff. So to start off anything, less than $300,000 or $400,000 is going to be a challenge, with cash. So that's the kind of sweet spot. That kind of size brewery also gives the opportunity to sell some kegs and sell some pack locally. And then as that goes, you can then expand your capacity as you wish. And not many breweries get sort of beyond that size, partly because of local distribution, and then retail over the bar is where your money is. That's the margin. As soon as you start getting national, as soon as you start employing a sales rep, for $100,000 a year, it's going to cost you with a car and expenses and superannuation. You've got to start selling an awful lot of beer, a lot of beer. So that local distribution, just you guys doing it yourselves, quite profitable. It's a really good business model. I'm doing it. I'm putting my own money in at the moment to do that. To go bigger and to go national just requires a huge amount of capital, a huge amount of energy. And there's a lot of really great companies out there with great brands and some very, very smart people doing it and struggling. So it's not for the faint-hearted, I have to say. And then the other side, we get people ringing up saying, I want to put a 300-litre brewery in and I want to do that. That is a commercial nightmare, because your labour costs for those super small breweries, you might think, I can afford, maybe 100, 150,000 to set up something super tiny, with pallets for tables and, second-hand chairs and all that stuff. But to try and make beer commercially viable, making 300 litres at a time will kill you. It really will.
Because they say economies of scale is extremely true in this industry, isn't it?
It is. Well, again, do the numbers. If you're making 10 kegs a week and you want to pay yourself a salary of, say, $1,000 a week, that's $100 a keg. So that's $100 labour a keg. Now, as soon as you do that and you put the extra costs on, you're just not making enough money from that keg. So you have to get over a certain hurdle. And that 500-litre system, multi-vessel, where you can do a couple of brews a day, that's probably the time when you start to make money out of it. And then you sell most of that through your retail outlet. And as soon as you start doing distribution, as soon as you start packaging into cans, God forbid bottles, all your margins to start to go down. And you have to be very, very clear on what it is you want to do.
Yeah,
sure.
Yeah, excellent. So you've already given us some really interesting realities, and I think including myself, even when we spoke on the phone a couple of months ago, sort of set me on the right track of how to go about it, doing my research. But moving on to, I guess, lessons and talking more about costs and realities, where should aspiring brewery owners first start out on the journey to opening a brewery? So what should they have organised as a minimum before contacting someone like yourself?
Well, I'm always happy for people to give us a call, and have a sort of a 20-minute chat about that, because I'm acutely conscious, like you've found, and you've obviously, taken this creative step of, doing a podcast, which will then generate the research that you need.
Yep.
I think the most important thing is to be very clear what it is you want to do, and if you want to start a brewery because you want to just have a brewery, it's not right. What you need to be sure of is that you're going to put something onto the market that is going to add to the market. You're going to give something to your customers that maybe isn't out there. Now, that could be a quality of beer. It could be a style of beer. It could be a location, of course, and that's important. It could be a brewery that is very community focused. It could be a brewery that's, doing crazy shit, or it could be, a wild, like, tofu, wildflower.
Yeah.
Find that niche. Why are you doing what you're doing? What are you going to offer that's different? And once you have that clear in your head, the rest of it becomes quite clear. Just wanting to have a brewery because you think it's cool having a brewery is not a good enough reason. And one of the things that frustrates me more than anything is I'll go into a bottle shop and I'll spend $20 on a 4-pack of a new brewery, and I take it home and it's undrinkable. Now, the only person that's getting pleasure from that is the brewer. And to take money off people without being able to produce a high quality product is anathema as far as I'm concerned. So you have to be very sure you can do that, which means that rather than concentrating on spending money on the equipment, like you went into equipment first,
Yep.
Don't worry about the equipment. Worry about what you want to do, where you want to do it, why you want to do it, and then be sure that you have the skills. Because if you've done a bit of home brewing and you want to run a brewery, again, it's like doing a bit of cooking at home and running a restaurant. You will generally fuck up unless you've got some, unless you're particularly smart. So I think the first thing you've got to do is actually do what you do. Go and talk to a lot of people, volunteer in your local brewery. Most people, if you say, I'll give you a day or two a week for 6 months, will get you onto the kegging line. And then most brewery owners know this path, and they will put their volunteers into what we call the dream crusher roles, which is kegging every day, cleaning floors, shoveling out louder tons. And what you'll find is that some people, and I've employed a lot of people over the years, you give people those jobs and they just fucking love them. They just love them. They just go, yeah, I'm going to do some kegging and all that kind of stuff. I'm going to clean the drains out. Yeah, I'm going to polish those tanks because that's going to look good. And they get that 90% of brewing is not about sitting down with recipes and being glamorous. It's about just hard work.
Yep.
And if you love that, you're going to love brewing. And I've seen quite a few people that I've talked to. I got to know them, and I've realised that that's not the kind of person that they are. And I know that they're not going to enjoy brewing. And I've seen it time and time again. Whereas I've got some people that have either got some experience, or they're just those kind of can-do, energetic people that just realise that you've got to love everything about brewing. And if you do, like I do, then it's a great industry to be in. Otherwise, it'll just it'll crush you quite clearly, because it is hard work, and you've got to do a lot of hours to make it work.
Yeah.
There's a lot of other people out there that are younger, fitter, and stronger than you are. Certainly me, that's for sure. Yeah.
And in your many years in the industry, you would have seen a lot of, things that people don't consider or overlook. What would you say are probably the most overlooked aspects of starting a brewery?
I think a couple of things. One is the technical knowledge that you need to make beer well, to make it routinely well, day in, day out, and most importantly, get it into a pack and get it out to the customer in good order so that it can sit there and wait for the customer to pick it up and not deteriorate. I've been doing this for 15 years. I've spent time with scores of brewers. I've written courses. I've trained hundreds of brewers as well. And I still, every time I talk to people, every time I go to a brewery, I learn something new. It's just a huge thing. There's a lot of technical information that you need to know. And certainly home brewing is not it. So, and I don't want to disparage home brewers, although I often do. It's more about, it's just a very, very different thing, and making 20 litres something. And I've judged a few homebrew competitions, and I have to say, it wasn't always a very pleasurable experience. It's that whole unknown unknowns. You don't know what you don't know. So you've got to get some experience in there. The other thing you can do, which has worked quite well, is we've done that with a few breweries, particularly the most recent is Jarvis Bay down in Huskinson. O'Sheen, who's the brewer there, smart guy, done a lot of home brewing. He's a scientist, and he bought the brewery from us, but I spent about 10 days with him driving between where I live in Barrel down to Jarvis Bay, and brewing down there was kind of a pleasurable thing. But I spent 8 or 10 days with him. I wrote all of his standard operating procedures. I trained him exactly how to do it. But he had a brand before, so he did gypsy brewing. Yep. And he spent quite a lot of time in breweries, listening, learning. So he wasn't completely green. And he's making great beer because he does what he's told. And I go down there every couple of months and spend a day with him and just make sure that everything's right and just keep him in check. So if you don't have experience, just budget 8 or 10 grand for someone like myself to spend 10 days with you and train you up. And that is a very, very good way of making sure you're going to do it. We're doing King Tide Brewing in Coffs Harbour, and Josh there, he's done the same. He's got a King Tide brand. He's making a little bit of beer at More Beer. I think it's in Port Macquarie, I'm not sure.
Yeah, no, I have heard of it. They've got a homebrew shop as well, isn't it? More Beer? Or am I maybe thinking of something else there?
Possibly. I don't know them.
Actually, you know what? Yeah, I am. I think it's an American homebrew shop. Yeah, I come across a lot of their stuff online.
Okay. Yes, possibly. So he's done contract brewing and he's developed a little bit of a brand. He's not made any money out of it, but he's learned a lot. And I'll be spending quite a lot of time in Coffs Harbour with him, just teaching him how to brew once the brewery is up and running. And that's smart. And if you're spending $300,000, $400,000, $500,000, $600,000, $700,000 on putting these projects together, spending $8,000 or $10,000 on actually learning how to make the core of your business properly is pragmatic.
Now, you mentioned gypsy brewing, and we've had a couple episodes where we really dived into that subject. That's something that does interest me. Of building a brand before investing in stainless and seeing if it doesn't work out, well, you haven't mortgaged the shit out of your house. You know what I mean? Sure. Couple comments that, if you don't mind now, just what are your thoughts on gypsy brewing?
Yeah, I think it's a great way of doing it. Someone like myself, when I was at William Bull, we did contract brewing, which is a similar kind of thing. But we did all of the Mountain Goat beer when Mountain Goat was starting off. We were the first guys to put 4 Pines beer into pack. All those years ago. Yeah. And what you get to do is those guys got to spend some time with me at my brewery learning, and I learned an awful lot, from the likes of Jared at 4 Pines, Richard Watkins at the Wigan Pen, now at Bent Spoke. I did all his beer. These people, and also the guys at Mountain Goat, Dave and Jane at the time. We just exchanged a lot of information, kind of worked out how to do this. So, someone like yourself going and doing work maybe with Australian Brewery, who do quite a lot of contract stuff, or I think Wayward do some. Sweet people like Dan at Australian and Sean at Wayward, just the really knowledgeable guys, and you can learn a huge amount. And what it means that you can do is you can kind of get your dream into reality, but also it teaches you the fucking hard work of getting out there and flogging your beer, just wearing out shoe leather, getting your kegs into pubs, getting your cans into bottle shops. And that's the hard bit of running a brewery. And if you enjoy that, and your brand sort of takes off and people like what you're doing, and you get positive on Untapped and the owners of the bottle shops, and there's a lot of specialist bottle shops out there, that you're right, it's a good way of doing it. And it's still hard work, but at least the technical aspects are taken care of, and you do learn a huge amount of stuff. So I think it's a good way to go, but it is still quite capital intensive. You still need quite a lot of money to buy all the packaging and all that stuff. But it also, you've got to set up your ATO license, and you've got to set up your wholesaler producer license. And again, I think that's good experience to do. So
starting out as a gypsy brewer, you can brew under someone else's license, correct?
You can. You absolutely can. You will need your wholesaler producer license if you want to sell it, because most breweries will not let you sell using their wholesaler producer license. But the other thing you can do now, indeed we've done it to start off, is you can set up your own ATO license even though you're brewing somewhere else. As long as you can demonstrate to the ATO that you are a separate business, separate brewery, even the fact you're using someone else's equipment, you can still get your rebate. And that, 60% up to $100,000 of tax that you pay, if you can get that back, that makes a huge difference to your business. So we've done that. We're brewing at Eden Brewery, but we've got our own ATO license, so we do our own returns and we get our own rebate. So I strongly suggest if somebody wants to do gypsy brewing, look at getting your own ATO license. But you've got to have a very good relationship with your contract brewer, because they will need to help you out with that. It's much more common in Victoria. I think hawkers, people like that, do that as a matter of routine. It's only really becoming a common thing in Australia, in New South Wales. But you'd have to chat to the owner, the head brewer, who's going to be helping you out to make sure that they're happy for you to do that, because they will have to provide quite a lot of information to you. So definitely worth looking at.
Excellent. Now, I guess one thing that has always been very blurry to me is, I guess it will always be blurry to someone who hasn't been through the process, but the council process, the DA process. Everyone always laughs at that. Pat touched on it in I think one of our first episodes on making sure you engage with your local council early on.
Yes.
Because they can be a nightmare to deal with. Sometimes they can be quite smooth, but it is a drawn out process, and
sure.
There's some areas of the DA process that don't run parallel with each other. Are you able to give the listeners a bit of a step by step?
Yeah, for sure. The most important thing to do is to look at what's called your LEP. I don't know if that's something you've talked about, but that's your local environment plan. That is what your local council will do. They produce, and that tells you what businesses you can run in different zones in your area. So if you've got an industrial area, you can put breweries in. If you've got a residential area, you can't. You simply can't do it. Now, if your LEP for where you want to put your brewery does not allow you to put a brewery in there, like it doesn't allow a manufacturing operation, there's just no point in trying to do it. Unless you have very deep pockets and very good lawyers and you actually want them to change the LEP so that they will say, okay, it's not in the local environment plan to have a manufacturing facility there, but these are the reasons why we want to do it and we think it's okay. You've actually got to change that zoning. Now, that's not something to be done lightheartedly. And I had a call from someone just last week who lives in this next sort of village to me, Borrowdoo, and it's all residential, and he wanted to put a brewery into his shed, basically his 3-car garage on his large property. And I just said, have you looked at the LEP? And he went, no. I said, well, they just won't let you do it. And they just simply won't. If you want to put a brewery in Southern Highlands, you've got to find an industrial area or a zone that allows you to put a brewery. If your LEP allows you to put a manufacturing operation in there, then the chances of you being able to do it are large, because if it's allowed use of that zone, council basically have to let you do it. So once you're happy with that, you need to understand what it is that you want to do. Go and sit down with your council. 10 years ago, it was a nightmare because most councils had never done brew pubs. Now just about everybody has. So they've been through the process. And then they will tell you sort of what you need to do. And you need to basically tell them what your business is going to be, how you're going to deal with odour, how you're going to deal with licensing. And then you've got to engage with your licensing cops, make sure they're happy. And then it's just that kind of conversation. But I think nowadays the council are pretty good. And as long as it's an allowed use for your zone, they will then take you through the process. And most people manage to do their own DAs. Using consultants for DAs can be pretty expensive. But again, you can take on a town planner who will help you with that process. And I don't know what they would charge, but you're probably talking 10 grand, I would imagine, to do it. And at that process, it's kind of, you get onto the treadmill and it's fine, really. Apart from that, it's just a lot of reports. You've got things like certifiers, you've got all sorts of stuff. It's probably too detailed to go into here. And I'm not the expert. There'll be people that would be better at doing that, for sure. But,
Well, I am planning to have someone potentially on from one of the councils that have had a lot of experience. Mayor Darcy Byrne is potentially going to be coming on. I don't know his intricacies with it. He's more of the councillor rather than the bureaucrat side of things.
Probably the bureaucrat you want to talk to. It'd be interesting to talk to him because they're very supportive. A lot of councils now realise, particularly, we're starting a brewery in Shoalhaven, and we're getting a lot of resistance from the locals. Because they don't necessarily want a brewery near them, but the LEP, it's very clear that we are allowed to do it. But then they're coming up with things like traffic management. They're coming about alcohol. So those are the kind of when you've got to get the police involved. And I guess the one thing is engage with your neighbours as soon as you possibly can and talk to them and let them understand. Now, if you're in an industrial area, that's not a problem. Something like Seventh Day, they found a premise and it was next door to a pizza place. And they went into the pizza place and said, look, guys, we're wanting to put a brewery in. Would you be interested? And the owner came out from behind his counter and gave them all a hug and then proceeded to invest quite a lot of money into the brewery because he realised it would bring a lot of business, and it has. They've doubled their turnover because the brewery is next door. Yeah. So it's those kind of softer things that can make a difference between success and failure. Whereas if you've got, I was involved in Young Henry's first attempt to put a brewery in Surrey Hills, and the resistance from the people nearby was huge. I went to a few council meetings and got pretty bodily threatened by some locals not wanting a brewery in there. So just be very clear. If if the place you want to put a brewery is a good fit for a brewery, like you don't have neighbours, it's industrial zone, you're going to be fine. If you've got a lot of neighbours and you're going to be making a lot of noise and it doesn't fit in with the LEP, you're going to struggle. So I think the path of least resistance is the best one there.
Yeah, okay. And some of the earlier episodes, I've gotten some brewers' opinions on bottles versus cans. Now, I pretty much know your opinion on it, and I know that you were one of the first, I guess, innovators of pushing for that. I think Dan from Australian said that you'd seen it from a mile away, many, many years ago, that this is the direction of the industry.
Yeah.
I know the American craft beer scene is pretty much all cans.
Definitely.
Share some thoughts on that.
I think that's really easy. Don't use bottles. I mean, just use cans. Cans better for the product, better environmentally. They're easier to fill. The equipment's cheaper. It's just, of all the decisions you have to make in life, when starting a brewery, make that decision. It's cans. Just do cans. Move on. Yeah.
And I know that you got a lot of these mobile canning companies like East Coast and Can It now, which I think is a Sydney
Yes.
service as well. And I guess canning lines can be almost as much as what a brewery would cost someone to start out. So I guess, any thoughts on when someone should look at investing in their own canning line? Because you wouldn't see a lot of new brewery startups investing in a canning line straight away.
No, indeed.
Yeah.
Particularly when you're doing the brew pub model, most of your volume is going to go into kegs, where your money is. It works very well. What's particularly well, I know the guys, what's the name of the canning guys? Chris owns it, East Coast Canning.
East Coast, yeah.
They do a good job. They've got Cody systems. They can well. The guys know how to use their equipment, and it's very efficient. They've also very smartly, they will sort of buy your cans, they will label them for you, and they'll store them for you. And so it seems quite expensive when you look at the sort of per litre cost of canning or the per can cost. But certainly we've looked as a group of 4 breweries, including my own, that want to buy a canning line and then use a sort of a share economy. Because you've got to realise that you buy a decent canning line, you probably only use it once a week or once a fortnight. So it's a very underutilised resource. So what East Coast Canning are doing is obviously sharing that cost around, but just the sheer cost of having people shipping the cans from A to B and stuff is quite expensive. So we're looking at actually sharing it between 4 breweries sort of locally and just putting it in a van and just sharing it.
Yeah, that's a good idea.
And that's something that I think as the arena becomes more competitive, I think that kind of shared resource, it's why gypsy brewing is a good idea. Sharing analytical equipment, which is expensive, sharing DO probes and sharing CO2 equipment. A lot of breweries will spend $300,000 or $400,000 setting up, and then they won't spend sort of $10,000 on how to measure CO2 and dissolved oxygen and pH and stuff. And actually, that's the first $10,000 you should spend. But I think to share that stuff around is a really, really good idea. So look at it. There are some sort of smaller canning lines coming through. I would be very hesitant about buying canning lines from China, I have to say, because canning lines can go wrong very quickly. Whereas there's some American stuff, some sort of cheaper stuff coming out. I can't remember I think is it just American Canning it's called maybe? And the guys at Quaker's Hat have bought one, and it's not brilliant, but I think it was $60,000-$70,000, which is probably half what you'd pay for a cask or a wild goose. And that's working very well for them, and they're doing quite well with it. And they don't have that extra cost of East Coast Canning coming in. But then you've got to buy 50,000 cans at a time, and you've got to buy a printer.
Especially for printed cans, you've got to, is it 60,000?
60,000.
60,000 is the minimum for printed cans.
Yeah, which is 2,000 cases a beer, and maybe the average sort of small brewery sells 100 or 200 cases a week maximum. And if you want to do a range of 3, you want to do a pale ale, an XPA, an IPA or whatever, then all of a sudden that's 150,000 cans. That's just a lot of cans, and you've got to store them somewhere, and you've got a lot of capital. So I think starting off with the mobile canning is a great idea until you're confident that the numbers work out for sure.
All right. So just moving on to some of your industry insights, which I'm sure you have a lot. the time that you've been in it. You've also had the honour of designing one of the first TAFE courses for brewing. Do you want to talk a bit about that?
Yeah, that was myself and Richard Adamson. Richard from Young Henry's works in different circles to I think he was having dinner with then Premier Mike Baird, and Mike said to him, what are your issues in your industry? And he said one is duty, but that's a federal issue, and the other one is training. And really, there's nowhere to learn how to brew really. And Federation University do the postgrad, but it's all theoretical. Great course. But I think I ended up spending like 2 hours brewing out of the whole year. So it's all theory. And when I went into my first brewery, I didn't know how to prime a pump. I didn't know how to attach a hose. It's that kind of basic stuff. So we were conscious that that resource was needed. I was Brewtique was starting to take off quite nicely. And I sort of wanted to move away from the Australian Brewery at the time and leave it to Dan. So I just put my hand up and said, look, I'll write it. So I put a steering committee together, and we put together a course structure within the confines of the TAFE system. It's very dictatorial about how you do it, and just sat down there for 6 months and wrote it. But also, just because we know everybody, we managed to then engage the likes of Wayward, Malt Shovel, Australian Brewery, Young Henry's, Four Pines, and we were very conscious that practical aspect was important. So the course, you do sort of 1 night a week at TAFE doing all the theory, and also you go into the food lab there and do a lot of just little experiments, mini mashes and sensory and all that real good stuff. And then you get up to about 30 days work experience over the course of 9 months, going 1 day a week to Four Pines, Australian Brewery, Young Henry's, really good breweries that teach you exactly how to do it. So you come out at the end of the year with quite a lot of practical experience. You do a lot of coursework, a lot of theory, but also, most importantly, probably a lot of sensory training as well. So you can recognise diacetyl, you can recognise acetaldehyde, you can recognise oxidation. So when you have problems in your own brewery, which you will, you can then realise what's going wrong and do it. So I think I'm very proud of that course. I know South Australian TAFE do one.
So is it a Certificate 3 in microbrewing?
In microbrewing, yeah. Yep. It's the same level of qualification if you're a chippy or a sparky, and it is a trade qualification. Steve Henderson is doing one up in Brisbane now for Queensland, but I haven't been particularly impressed by the South Australian one. It's done very quickly. There isn't a lot of technical stuff in there, and there isn't that kind of level of experience in there. It's not nearly as practical based. And for some reason, Queensland took the South Australian model rather than the New South Wales model, which was a real surprise to me. So I know Hendo will do a great job up there, but whether the structure of it is what people need, I don't know particularly. So.
And which TAFEs here in Sydney or New South Wales do it? Ultimo.
Just the one. Yep. And again, for some reason, TAFE hasn't really taken that as national as it should do. I don't know why, because the course was oversubscribed tenfold on every single application. So, clearly there's money to be made, and TAFE's crying out for cash now. They're struggling. But it's definitely the way to go, I think.
No, excellent.
If you can.
And I guess some of your contributions like the TAFE course and everything you're doing around Australia in the brewing industry led to a pretty prestigious award. Sorry to sort of give you a big head or make you blush, but the contribution award to the beer industry.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, it was just it was glorious to get it. I have to say, it really was. And actually, what I've done now is all the sort of volunteer stuff that I've done. All this, I've kind of stopped doing it now because obviously I'm not going to get another award now, so I can just relax and get on and do my own thing. But I just think it's such a glorious industry to work at, and I've just been lucky enough to be there at the right time and just been profoundly enthusiastic about it. And it's always a way, make your hobby your work, and you never have to work another day in your life. Now, it certainly isn't that easy, particularly putting in breweries around the country is pretty stressful. But it was nice to be recognised, and I can just fade into obscurity now quite comfortably, having done it for sure.
Nice. And what would you say the future of the not just the craft industry, but the beer industry in general in Australia? How do you think that looks?
We've talked about peak craft for years now, but what I'm seeing is the amazing prospect of pretty much every town and suburb having their own brewery. And I don't think we're anywhere near peak at all. I think, let's face it, a smallish craft brewery, brew pub in a trading estate or in a suburb somewhere is something that people really want to go to. And if there's an industry that I would be worried about, it would be the pub industry, because I don't think pubs have evolved well. I think a lot of pubs, their offering is very banal. I think the food is poor. And I think it's not the place that a lot of people want to go with families. Whereas you go to, places like Wayward, and you've got a huge range of, people in there. The dogs are in there. You go to Jarvis Bay, and there's kids running around, and the dogs are running around, and people that would never go to a pub on a sunny afternoon will absolutely go and sit in a beer garden of a brew pub. And I think that's been very clear over COVID, the amount of social capital that small breweries get, because if you start your brewery, you're going to be working there, you're going to get to know everybody, your family's going to be there, your friends are going to be there, and people love that shit. And I think as people are beginning to realise how important community is, pubs don't generate that, I don't think. You go into a pub, it doesn't feel friendly, whereas you go to Jarvis Bay, or you go to, Willie the Boatman, and Pat's standing there, chatting to everybody. You get to know the people that are there. And I don't know of any brewery that's not done really well over COVID, because people have gone, I want to go to the brewery and meet the owner there. And even if it's only a 5-minute chat while they're filling my growler, it's some social interaction that I wouldn't be able to get. And I just think it's going to get better and better. And we're putting breweries into Mount Gambier, into Aldinga in South Australia, Gladstone, Cairns, more in Sydney, and all of them are really optimistic, and all of them are full, and all of them are buying more tanks. So I think it's just incredibly exciting, particularly seeing as I've got a business that supplies breweries. But I would never go to a pub nowadays, but I would always go to a craft brewery, and meet the people and have a chat and just enjoy it. So I think the future's incredibly bright.
Oh, that's really reassuring. And I know a lot of my previous guests have said similar things. Some have said, we're not quite in the early stages as, back in 2010, or maybe even as early as when you started out, 2005. But, we're definitely not at the peak. The market isn't exhausted like the American market. So it's looking pretty promising from what you just said there for new brewery owners to enter the market.
And even you look at someone like Bolter is a great example. I mean, those guys only started, 3 years ago? So this sort of belief that, there isn't room there for a big brewery, and we've talked a lot about brew pubs and stuff, but, if you've got a good business model and a good brand and plenty of money behind you and some good people that know what they're doing, I think, there's still room for that. I can see someone like Mountain Culture, a DJ out in Katoomba. I can see his brand becoming very big, straight away, and he's got the real buzz about it. I don't think he hasn't got the space, but it's still there. There's still a lot of excitement, and people are still looking for new stuff. I think if you can hit that vibe, and you've got balls the size of Egypt, then you can still do it, I'm sure.
And thoughts about beer trends? We've talked a lot about hazies and sours and even the low alcohol beers. Starting to make some
really good ones. Dainton have done their New Age IPA. My God, what a good beer that is. I mean, I'd actually drink that in preference to some other beers, and it's only 1% alcohol, and I never thought I'd hear myself saying that on the record. I think the next sort of thing is going to be, we've done obviously hops and hazy, and I was at Source the other day, and I think they put 225 kilos of dry hops into 8,000 litres of beer. Now that's
what's that, grams per litre?
I think it's like, is it 25 grams per litre or something like that? Yeah. It's something enormous anyway. I mean, that's just, it's fine, but that's $8,000 worth of hops. so I think we've done that. I think, and certainly what I've identified with my own brewery, Harvest, we're putting in open fermentation, and we're putting in natural lagering, and we are currently talking to Siebel University about utilising. They've got a huge bank of different yeast strains, like about 3,000 yeast strains that they've sort of collected over time. And what's interesting is if you talk to most breweries, they almost all use US5, W3470 for their lagers. God knows why, awful yeast. So I think hops have been done, hazies have been done. They will carry on. I mean, they're good styles of beer. They're fun to drink. But I think yeast is the next big thing. We're starting to sell quite a lot of yeast propagation systems. So rather than just going to your cool room and opening a pack of dried yeast and chucking it in, and US5 is fine, but it's very neutral. People will start to use much more interesting yeasts, because I think people underestimate the character that a yeast gives to a beer. Yeah. US5 is great. Someone like the Verdant IPA that Lallemand are doing now is really interesting. That really kind of accentuates the hop character. It's very sort of clean, but it's got some nice fruit character in there. But you go historically, and a lot of breweries sort of pre-industrialization would have multiple yeast strains. They wouldn't have the single pure monoculture that we have now. They would have 2 or 3. I spent a day at Timmy Taylor's brewery in Keighley. Glorious day. Ended up in their tasting rooms 3 stores down in their cellars, drinking all their casks and stuff.
Wow.
So that was a happy day. But they have 3 yeasts that sort of and they serial repitch, and it kind of evolves and changes. But those 3 different yeasts, it's 2 or 3, give it a whole new character to the beer. So I think, obviously TAFE is exploring the sort of the sour, the wild pitches and all that kind of stuff with that variability that he gets. And I think people are going to have to start looking at, there's thousands of different yeast strains out there, and use those to add some real character to the beer, because we can't do much more with malts, we can't do much more with hops, but most people are very scared of yeast management.
Yeah, and that's something that I've probably not done enough research in and overlooked as a home brewer. I mean, I'm so hell-bent on what hops go well with other hops, and when I should dry hop it, and well pooling, and and I've used USO5 plenty of times, and you're right, it's a very clean and probably bland type yeast. I mean, if you want the hops and malt to really sing, then you use a USO5, but I'm a dry yeast sort of bloke, and I wouldn't have a clue on what it is to, reuse yeast and wash yeast, and
absolutely.
So basically what you're saying is yeast management is key to making unique beers.
Oh, look, yeast management is so underutilized, and I see some horrors really, and a lot of what we did at Beer Farm was about yeast viability, making yeast as happy as possible. And we would get, viabilities up 98, 99%. So you've got a lot of really lively, happy, energetic yeast, and that makes great beer. And what I do taste, I get a lot of beer sent to me. I taste beers that there's nothing really wrong with them, but all those incredibly expensive hops that people throw in huge quantities are just muted because the yeast haven't been happy, and the yeast are throwing off some sort of subtle off flavors, but it's just muting the whole thing. So, you've got to, if you get your yeast management right, then a single malt, single hop beer will taste great. You put as many American crazy, what's that new one? Something sounds like Neurotron, or it sounds like some superhero.
No, anyway, I'm not sure. I hear Kvik, is it Kvik or Kvik yeast comes up? Kvik.
Yeah.
That seems to be the rage right now, but never used it. But
it's all very hot and alcohol-y, and
estery.
So I think yeast is going to be the way, and there's thousands out there that we can use, and obviously mixes of yeasts, and it's going to be the thing.
Excellent. And what would you say are some things? And you've probably got a lot of opinions on this as well. I think Dan might have said you'd have a lot to say about this. That is holding back the industry. Things that we or the craft beer industry, or maybe even the IBA, can better lobby for from local and state and federal.
Yeah, I'm sure some people would disagree. I actually think we've got quite a lot of support from local government. I think the ability to get licenses now, to get drink on premise licenses, and I think a lot of what the Inner West brewers, and particularly Richard Adamson, have done is really push that envelope. I think there's a couple of things. One is the DA process is expensive and tedious, and I think so many more breweries should be what they call complying development. It should be, if it's in this zone and you want to put a brewery, it's a compliant development. You don't have to go through the whole DA process. And it's much, much simpler and much cheaper. For instance, in Shoalhaven, where we're putting our brewery, I think we spent $100,000 on a DA process. Now, part of that is because our whole brewery is going to be off-grid. It's all solar, it's waste management, it's rainwater capture. So there's a lot of expense to do with that. But it's just tedious. And so you spend all this money and you've no guarantee that you're going to get it in the end. You can still get knocked back. So I think it's that is going to be one thing. But the other one as well is beer quality. And I was sent, I think, 40 pale ales for a magazine article, and we went through those quite carefully with a group of brewers, and probably half of those had faults, or they were not particularly inspiring. And probably out of those 40, there was only 10 that we kind of went, what we do, we pass the pint test. If you drink it and you go, if someone said, do you want a pint of that? You'd go, oh, yes, please. And we would have happily drunk a pint. So we've still got some quality issues, and we've got a lot of small breweries that are packaging beer particularly without the necessary skills to do it. And people have got to learn how to do this properly. And if they don't know how to do it, there's quite a few consultants. There's people like Hendo up in Queensland, Brody ex-Source. I think he knows his stuff. He's now putting himself out as a consultant. Less so me. I don't really have the time now, but. Just find a decent brewer and say you'll pay him for a couple of days, pay him $500, $700 a day, and get him to come in and tell you what you should be doing and write that process down and follow it religiously. And you've got to make good beer. And it's not happening as much as it should, although it is getting better for sure. Yeah.
Oh, that's good. And great advice. And a couple of comments about COVID. How do you think that's going to... it's a bastard of a thing, but it's also been somewhat of a blessing in disguise,
hasn't it? We've actually selling a lot of tanks now. What's happened over COVID is people have very much concentrated, and again, that sort of brew pub model they've concentrated on over the bar. And of course, as soon as the bar closed, it was holy shit, what are we going to do? And those people with some distribution packaged product have suddenly put all their energy into getting distribution. Now, if everybody's like me, my beer consumption has done nothing but increase over the past 3 or 4 months.
You're not alone there, mate.
Including last night. And what's happening now is because they're focused on distribution, which they probably wouldn't have done much before, everyone's ordering more tanks because now that their venues are starting to open, they're just realizing, well, I can't keep up with both. So, and I think that whole sort of drink local thing and people just popping to their brewery to buy a beer and getting their growlers filled up. I have to say, I think of all of the horror of COVID and all the negativity for our industry particularly, and I think we've got 7 breweries in production in China at the moment, and 2 more to come. So we've never been busier.
Well, there's been a big pivot from global to now local because of COVID right across the world.
Indeed.
People want to support their local cafe, their local brewery, their local whatever.
Absolutely.
They think that small business needs to survive. So it has changed people's mindsets around it.
I think it has. And people begin to realise that actually those little micro interactions you have with people, become very precious. You might not have thought, having a quick chat with your barista was going to be important if you're going to work and seeing 100 people during the day. But when you're going back and, just seeing the missus and the dog, all of a sudden. So I think people have had a bit of a value shift on how important that is. And I think that's, you've always got to look for the positives, but I think it's pretty glorious. And I know I heard that New South Wales is now outside areas 2 meters, which is great. But I think people have got to be careful because we've seen how rapidly small outbreaks become.
Yeah, like the UK and Melbourne constantly on a roller coaster ride of stay in or go out.
Yeah, it's a nightmare.
Yeah.
So,
well, once again, I do appreciate you sharing some time with us, Neal, and glad that we're able to finally work out a day to sort of record this. But any closing thoughts or advice to aspiring brewery owners? Don't do it.
No. On the contrary, I think you do. But just be very clear about what you want to do, and be very clear whether you've got the skills to do it. And the one other bit of advice that I would give is be very careful about who you go into business with, because most of the heartbreaks that I've seen in the industry has been about people, and you know what it's like when you're excited and you want to do it, and maybe you need a bit of money, and someone comes along who you're not that sure about, but they want to put $100,000 in, and that's the difference between you going and not going. You've just got to be very honest with yourself and look at these people and decide whether you want to go into business with them, because it does put an awful lot of pressure. It's like any relationship, that process of DAs, building, cash, getting the business open. Even Jarvis Bay, 4 guys, they're really good friends, lovely, lovely guys. By the time it was getting close to opening, there was a lot of tension in the air. Now, they've held together beautifully, and they've known each other for a long time, but just pick your partners well. And any doubts in your mind, just don't do it, because any cracks will get very wide during the process, for sure.
Yeah, great advice. Anything that you'd like to plug? I know that you said you didn't want to talk too much about Brewtique, and it was purely just about the content and letting listeners know about opening a brewery. But anything you'd like to plug? We're probably going to be this is going to go live probably in another 2 weeks to a month. So
yeah, sure. Oh, look, we're just happy to chat to people. If people want to contact Brewtique to talk about setting up a brewery, we've done it. We take a lot of responsibility for what we do, to the point where Gavin and I, don't get as much sleep as we should. But we really want to see that. We have the vision. It's not about the brewery. It's about that first glorious pint of beer. That beautiful hoppy, head retentive beer put on the bar. That's the culmination of all your hard work. And we just want to make sure that first beer that you get is just everything that you want it to be. And that's our kind of vision, really. And we have a lot of friends throughout the process. So, 95% of the people we built breweries for we're very close to. There's obviously the odd one that we struggle with, but it's just been a glorious ride, and we just enjoy the projects themselves, for sure.
Yeah, excellent. Well, thanks again, Neal. Everyone, Neal Cameron, and hope you enjoyed that episode.
Thanks for listening to another episode of the Build Me a Brewery podcast. That was part 1 of the brewery consulting and quality management segment. Part 2 of the segment, I chat with Steve Hendo from Rockstar Brewer. Another mammoth episode here, so please make sure to listen to it, as Hendo does not hold back when it comes to the harsh realities of opening a brewery, including his own opinion of the modern-day gypsy brewing model. As always, if you're liking the podcast so far and find the content useful, please give us a follow and rating on whatever platform you're listening on. Also, follow us on all our social media handles, as well as visiting our website, www.buildmeabrewery.com.au, and much more complimentary content will be coming your way if you sign up to our mailing list. I'm Chris Hayton, your host, and this is the Build Me a Brewery podcast.